Number 9. Eddie Ray Routh. 25-year-old U.S. military veteran Eddie Ray Routh was struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder and schizophrenia in 2013. In order to help him cope, his friends Chad Littlefield and famed sniper Chris Kyle took him on a getaway to a resort in Texas. By then, he'd spent at least 2 years in and out of mental hospitals. During the trip, Routh shot and killed Kyle and Littlefield at the resort's shooting range. He then stole Kyle's truck and drove to his sister's house, where he confessed to what he'd done. She then quickly called 911 to report the crime. Police apprehended Routh after a tense 30-minute standoff that was followed by a high-speed chase. He told investigators that he shot the victims because they wouldn't talk to him. It was later revealed that during the drive up to the range, Kyle sent Littlefield a text stating, "This dude is straight up nuts," suggesting that somehow he knew he was in danger. Littlefield responded with, "Watch my six," which is military slang for "watch my back." Routh pleaded not guilty due to insanity, but not everyone bought his claim that he lost the ability to differentiate between right and wrong. A forensic psychiatrist testified that he suspected Routh was faking schizophrenia and that his symptoms were caused by drug and alcohol use. Another expert echoed similar beliefs. The jury found Routh guilty of capital murder, and he was sentenced to life without parole for his crimes. Number 8. Scott Merriman. Former U.S. paratrooper Scott Merriman was never the same after serving in Afghanistan. He was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder in 2009, and his marriage continued on a slow, downward spiral over the years as his mental health continued to deteriorate. Merriman struggled with depression and chronic nightmares while using alcohol to cope. At the same time, he was in denial about the severity of his mental illness and developed a habit of avoiding treatment. In early 2002, Merriman descended into a psychotic episode marked by troubling spiritual delusions. He became obsessed with the Book of Revelation and started to believe that the end of the world was near and that he was called to become a prophet. During that time, he asked if he could ride along with a friend who planned to drive from Kansas to Washington, D.C. for work. The friend said yes, and Merriman wrote in a Facebook post that he was going on a God-led journey to our nation's capital. By then, his family had already become extremely concerned about his state of mind, and the post made them worry even more. Merriman's wife called him and pleaded with him to turn around. Instead, he called the police and accused her of stalking him. After hearing the family's concerns, law enforcement alerted the Secret Service. Federal agents managed to get in touch with Merriman, who began rambling about how God tasked him with lopping the head off the serpent in the heart of the nation. Not wanting to do anything with the mess at hand, Merriman's friend dropped him off at a gas station and let the Secret Service know about it. After being searched and let go, Merriman rented a room at a nearby hotel and began threatening to kill President Joe Biden on social media. He also made his intentions clear to his mother and to White House staff members. Due to his mental condition and the court's belief that Merriman genuinely needs more help than he needs prison, the judge granted a 36-month deferred prosecution agreement. If he adheres to the requirements, which include inpatient psychiatric treatment, the case will eventually be dropped. However, if he breaks the agreement, the case will resume. Number 7. Juan David Ortiz. While working as a U.S. Border Patrol intel supervisor in 2018, Navy veteran Juan David Ortiz allegedly murdered 4 prostitutes in a sickening plot to clean up the streets. The horrifying crimes occurred in a border town in southern Texas. After the first 2 murders of 29-year-old Melissa Ramirez and 42-year-old Claudine Ann Luera, a woman named Erica Pena escaped from Ortiz. She accused the man of pointing a gun at her after he picked her up in his vehicle. She later testified in court that he acted suspiciously when he brought up one of the recent murders, saying that he'd recently been with one of the women and was worried law enforcement would find his DNA on her body. Pena sought help from a state trooper nearby and Ortiz fled the scene. Prosecutors say he then murdered his next two victims, 35-year-old Giselda Alicia Cantu and 28-year-old Janelle Ortiz. Authorities apprehended the suspect at a hotel parking garage. During questioning, he reportedly admitted to committing the murders, describing his victims as trash and dirty, although he allegedly helped feed their addictions and utilized their services. The disgraced former serviceman's lawyer argued that Ortiz was a broken man who suffered adverse effects from psychiatric medication he was put on to help him sleep. He maintains his innocence to this day and claims that his confession was coerced. But in December of 2022, he was sentenced to life in prison for his crimes. Number 6. Joseph Hunter. From 1983 to 2004, Joseph Hunter served in the U.S. Army as a talented marksman and sniper who passed his skills on to other soldiers. However, he went rogue after leaving the military and made a living working internationally for high-level career criminals, including a crime boss who tasked him with ordering a hit on a real estate agent in the Philippines. Hunter did his dirty work with the help of other former U.S. soldiers he recruited. In addition to plotting the real estate agent's murder in 2012, he worked for a notorious weapons and drug trafficker named Paul LaRue. Prosecutors would later accuse him of torturing, killing, and kidnapping people for years under the guise of being a mercenary. They also alleged that Hunter was responsible for as many as 7 murder-for-hire plots. His criminal lifestyle was interrupted when he was convicted of plotting to kill a federal agent and received a 20-year prison sentence. Hunter and his co-conspirators were subsequently charged in connection with the murder of the real estate agent, and he was also slapped with charges related to other crimes. In the end, he was found guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. Number 5. Jacob Blair Scott. When U.S. military veteran Jacob Blair Scott withdrew $45,000 from the bank and disappeared from his Alabama home in 2018, he was facing some serious charges for assaulting a young woman. Around the same time, police responded to a distress call in the Gulf of Mexico and found his small dinghy with nothing in it except a farewell note and a gun. An extensive Coast Guard search failed to turn up any other signs of him. Investigators soon learned that Scott had written goodbye letters to his family members, telling them to keep the same phone numbers for a year after he disappeared. Suspecting that he was faking his own death, they called on federal authorities to get involved, and the U.S. Marshals Service added Scott to its 15 most wanted fugitives list. Law enforcement finally caught up with him in 2020 at an Oklahoma trailer park, where he was living under the identity of a former co-worker without the person's knowledge or consent. Scott admitted to having an inappropriate relationship with an underage victim, but reportedly blamed her and other factors rather than taking responsibility for his life-ruining decisions. He was extradited to Alabama, where he was found guilty of the original charges stemming from the assault and received an 85-year prison sentence. He was also convicted of the charges related to his faked death, including sending a false distress call and giving false information. For the added charges, he'll be serving 3 additional 21-month sentences, which will run concurrently with his 85-year sentence. Scott was also ordered to pay $10,000 in fines and over $17,000 in restitution to the Coast Guard for wasting resources. Number 4. Walter Smith. In 2006, a soldier from Utah that had served in Iraq snapped and killed his wife after dealing with PTSD. Former Marine Walter Smith was seriously traumatized by the atrocities he witnessed while serving in the American invasion of Iraq. He was medically discharged from the service due to his struggles with post-traumatic stress disorder, but his mental state continued to deteriorate. Smith carried on with his life the best he could until eventually his demons took over completely. In 2006, he killed his girlfriend and the mother of his twin children, 22-year-old Nicole Spears. He initially told police that he found Nicole dead in their bathtub upon returning home from neighboring Idaho. The crime went unsolved until 9 months later, when he turned himself in and confessed to the murder. Smith couldn't give a reason for why he strangled Nicole to death in an unprovoked attack. While nobody meant to excuse his actions, the case highlighted the shortcomings in treatment for veterans struggling with PTSD. Some even wondered if proper intervention would have prevented the tragedy from happening. The amount of attention that the media gave to the issue left Nicole's surviving loved ones feeling like her death was being overshadowed. Her father, John Spears, told Deseret News that he felt people were putting too much blame for Smith's actions on the war, adding that while combat was a valid factor in Smith's behavior, it wasn't a reason or an excuse for what he did. Smith was ultimately convicted of manslaughter and was released from prison in 2021 after serving the maximum of his 1 to 15-year sentence. Number 3. Colin Reeves. 34-year-old Colin Reeves from Somerset, England, got into a parking dispute with his neighbors in 2021 when their new car made it more difficult for him to maneuver his vehicle in and out of his assigned space. Tensions grew over the following months, with Reeves displaying increasingly explosive and concerning behavior. In one incident, he allegedly showed up at the garden center where one of his neighbors worked and stared her down. The police got involved twice, but neither event resulted in charges for either party. Things nearly reached a boiling point 9 months after the dispute began, when Reeves and the woman got into a vicious shouting match. Then, days later, his wife told him that she wanted a trial separation, saying, "There's only so many years I can take your crap." Fueled by rage, Reeves went into the bedroom and took a ceremonial dagger off the wall that he'd received upon leaving the British military. He then climbed a fence into his neighbor's yard and stabbed Stephen and Jennifer Chappell to death. Afterward, Reeves called the police and confessed to the crime. He argued in court that he was guilty of manslaughter due to diminished responsibility stemming from the military-related post-traumatic stress disorder. 2 court-appointed psychiatrists concluded that he suffered from depression but had no severe mental illnesses. He was found guilty of murder and was consequently sentenced to life with a minimum of 38 years. Number 2. Craig Lang. In April of 2018, a middle-aged couple was ruthlessly gunned down in the parking lot of a Florida church. Seraphin and Deanna Lorenzo drove 3 hours to buy some guns from a private seller who listed them online, but instead they became the victims of a brutal robbery. Investigators traced the double murder to Craig Lang and Alex Zweifelhofer. Lang was a former U.S. soldier who was discharged after going AWOL and threatening to kill his ex-wife. Zweifelhofer was another veteran who deserted the U.S. military to become a mercenary overseas. The men were determined to reach Venezuela and fight with the civilian resistance there, but they needed money, something they stood to gain by luring the Lorenzos to a phony gun sale. Zweifelhofer was apprehended in Wisconsin in 2019. Authorities tracked Lang down in Ukraine, where he's not seen as a cruel killer but as a hero, defending the country's national interests. He first fought there for a far-right fringe militia in 2016 and returned at some point after the Lorenzos' murder. Lang remains in Ukraine, where he has a wife and a young child, while fighting his extradition and seeking asylum status. The case has largely fallen off the media's radar since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in early 2022, but it's believed that Lang remains at large. And at number 1, Tyler Griffiths. In a boneheaded crime that was captured on camera in 2019, 22-year-old Tyler Griffiths robbed a store in Halifax, England at knife point. He wore a mask but forgot to cover up his distinctively tattooed hands, which ended up playing a crucial role in identifying him as the prime suspect. Griffiths tried to pry open the till with a kitchen knife. When it wouldn't budge, he forced the cashier to open it. He warned the employee not to call the police or he'd kill her, and made off with several $100s. Police arrested Griffiths about a month later after the crime with the help of some members of the public, who recognized his hand tattoos. Officers found cocaine in his possession, and it would later be revealed in court that he committed the robbery because he was in debt due to his drug addiction. He developed the habit after serving 4 years in the armed forces and apparently spiraled out of control. Just a week after committing the robbery, Griffiths went into another shop and shoved the 75-year-old owner into shelving before taking some cash from the register. He was also caught shoplifting some expensive items, including cell phones and a camera. In the end, the court sentenced him to 3 years in prison for his crimes. If you suspected that someone you care about was a danger to themselves or to others, would you reach out to authorities despite the person's threat to never speak to you again? Or would you try to keep an eye on the situation and wait to take action until the person's behavior became undeniably dangerous? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.